I don't know if you ever had the pleasure of going through a hurricane. I just did, live in Houston, Texas. And I had no idea how big a hurricane can be. This thing was more than 1,000 kilometers across. 1,000 kilometers across. It decided to make landfall. The eye of the hurricane made landfall about 30 miles from my house. And then it proceeded to go over the city. The eye of the hurricane, which by the time it went over the city, had shrunk down to maybe 10, 15 kilometers, went over our neighborhood. So we learned all sorts of things about hurricanes that I never thought that I would learn. You can imagine 12 hours of winds between 100 and 200 kilometers per hour. That can get your attention. And so I consider it a miracle that I was able to get on a plane, the first round of planes that got out of Houston to come here to Milan. And frankly, the fact that I'm here, I hope it will take for what it is, a testimony to how much I care about being here, and I'm thankful I am for the invitation to be here, because not only care about the field in general of nanotechnology and nanomedicine, but certainly I very much care about what's happening here in Milano and here in Italy. And later on in the afternoon, you will hear about some developments that have to do with the development of a center for nanomedicine and a foundation for nanomedical research here in the city of Milan, that I think I wanted to be part of the celebrations, so to speak, for the launching of that. Now, I am in this morning's presentation, which is the next 10, 15 minutes, I'm not going to be talking about the science that we do in my laboratory. We have a big lab. I hope you'll be able to stick around for the afternoon session, where I will tell you something about our research programs. But my thesis, my two theses for this morning are that, number one, nanomedicine is a team sport. It requires many components that come from different disciplines, domains, multi-institutional, actually multi-national more often than not, and that is not only a good idea, it's a requirement, it's a necessity. So the winners, if you will, are going to be those that are able to put the teams together. The second thesis is, and it's just my personal opinion, that those teams need to be formed bottom-up. That is, they have to start with the grassroots level type of effort that involves the individual investigators, and then it is the institutions or the systems or the frameworks' responsibility to make sure that they are organized into larger and larger entities. That's one way in which things can be made to work. Top-down framework agreements between countries, between institutions, without, of course, the implementation of the grassroots level are not as effective. So those are my two theses. I will be very careful not to make any predictions after what Professor Dominic said. If I make any wrong prediction, then I have to shut up for 6 months. So I'll make sure that I only predict the past as opposed to the future. And I will like to talk to you about these two theses just by showing you an example of what we are doing in Houston, Texas, under the assumption that perhaps I'll show you all of our mistakes so you can go out and make some new ones. You don't have to repeat the same mistakes that we made. So let me tell you about this program that we have. It's called the Alliance for Nanohealth. So the focus again is going to be a programmatic presentation of what we do at the Alliance for Nanohealth. Let me spend a few minutes describing that. If you've not been to Houston, Texas houses the nation's #1 medical center, by far the largest medical center in the country. And you see a part of the medical center is more than 40 skyscrapers, so it's a really big thing. If they say that in Texas everything is big, so even nanometers are big in Texas. So, you know, a medical center, if it was a city, would be one of the 25 biggest cities in the United States. That's how big it is. Now, and it has a number of #1 institutions in the country, like the #1 cancer center, the MD Anderson Cancer Center where I practice, and a few other ones. Houston, Texas was also the birthplace of nanotechnology, shall we say. One of the events that caused the transition of nanotechnology from science fiction, as Professor Dominic Salvatore said, from science fiction into science. And one of those foundational events was the discovery, of course, of the fullerene, or the C60 molecule, which happened independently, simultaneously, arise by the work of two scientists, Rick Smalley and Bob Curl, and of course, Dr. Sir Croto in the UK. So the whole notion of the Alliance for Nanohealth is a given that Rice University is across the street from the medical centers. Let's build a bridge and let's play team sport. That was the idea, and the idea actually came to Rick Smalley himself. Unfortunately, Rick Smalley died in 2005, but it was his initiative to start the Alliance for Nanohealth together with a cardiologist by the name of Rick Cassels. Trip Cassels is now the Assistant Secretary for Health Affairs in the Department of Defense, but he's an eminent cardiologist. So the two together came up with the notion of integrating a number of faculty and trying to identify ways to bridge the chemists with the doctors, the immunologists with the physicists, the mathematicians, the engineers, and the economists. And so they started doing that using as gluons, to use the language of physics a little bit, money. Money is the ultimate gluon, as we well know. So I tried to identify some funds centrally that could then be distributed to meritorious teams. And seed programs were awarded, seed funds were awarded, seed grants, with the condition that the recipient of the seed grants had to be teams that had never worked together. If you published together before, we're not going to let you run for this. We want to force new teams to create themselves, and that was the beginning. I came in the early 2006, and I've been the president of the Alliance for the year since, a short period since, riding on the shoulders of the giants, as we do in science, and my job is to bring in money centrally from the federal government, from anybody, the state government, anybody that will bring it in, and then find ways to distribute it to create infrastructure and opportunities for innovation to take place. The member institutions include, as I mentioned, Rice, University of Houston, University of Texas, and the Anderson Cancer Center, Baylor College of Medicine, and University of Texas Medical Branch, completely underwater now. They are in Galveston, and Texas A&M. And we bring in funds from a variety of different sources. Currently, again, Texas, everything is big. Currently, we have grown to more than 500 participating laboratories across these 8 institutions, and we are delighted that we fund more than 50 of those directly laboratories. As you see, we brought in about $30 million or so, and we are distributing it around. More than 50 investigators and teams. We like the notion, as I mentioned earlier, to start with 2 one-on-one partnerships with 2 ONs, again, using the language Boris on places, and then to integrate those into larger programs. To give you some examples of what we do, so seed grants is what we started with, and we created these multi-advisor training programs where we essentially give to postdoctoral researchers funds that would be equivalent to a large research grant on the conditions that they be advised. So they are their own principal investigators, and they are advised by at least 2 investigators in 2 entirely different fields, say mathematics and biology, and at 2 different institutions. So that teaches leadership and gives starting a career as independent investigator. We have created core infrastructure to help with clinical translation. Our objective is getting nanotechnologies into the clinic. And to do that, as you learned from Dr. Sanhai, is a very difficult proposition, as you well know, and it requires a lot of infrastructure, things such as good manufacturing practices type of laboratories where you can make sufficiently high-grade materials that you can use for human clinical trials, or good laboratory practices that you can employ for the right type of animal studies that you can then bring with confidence to Dr. Sanhai and her people at the Food and Drug Administration. We also took advantage of the fact that there are many opportunities for multiple use, dual use of multiple use technologies. So for instance, the same problems, and I'll give you some examples this afternoon, the same problems that are central in healthcare on planet Earth are also tremendously important in healthcare for deep space exploration. So NASA, which is also in Houston, as you may remember from the movies, NASA works with us because when they send people out in space, they need to be able to do early detection of disease. Because, it's hard to come back when you are on your way to Mars. It's a long trip. They need to be able to do early detection. They need to be able to dose the drugs with great preciseness, because in space, the amount of drug that individually we need for the same disease can be tremendously different. And you can literally kill an astronaut with a dose that would actually not be sufficient to do anything in another one. But those two problems, early detection and individualizing therapy, are the two fundamental problems in medicine. So we consider the fact that we are looking at the same direction, and everything that NASA does has to be FDA approved as well. They don't get any exceptions. And so we try to work together for civilian, space, and military applications. We recognize that there is no way to bring a new nanotechnological device or product into the clinic or drug unless there is a commercial entity behind it. Whether we like it or not, that's the reality of life. You know, I had a tremendous conversation with the folks outside. I would encourage you to spend some time with them, with the protesters outside, tremendously bright and well-principled young men and women that essentially say nanotech is bad because it is the crutch of capitalism. You know, they're probably right. You know, I don't know, maybe they're right partway or not, I don't know. I would encourage you to go out and discuss this with them, but reality is that's the one way to make it happen and to bring drugs to people that are dying of diseases, new drugs and new approaches. So with that in mind, we focus on commercialization and translation opportunities. Education is the key, outreach is the key. We have programs for school kids. We have all sorts of different situations and opportunities. I'll tell you about, in particular, we recognize how important it is for us to be able to work in partnership with the FDA, because of course they are the mission control. And so we have been reaching out to them to develop partnerships, not privileged to us, but with us as a portal to the rest of the community, as a managing partner, if you will. And of course, these grants that come in have then leveraged out, been in a multitude in additional grants. One thing that we did with the FDA was this notion of setting up a group, a study group that met for 2 days in Houston that had international participants, one from the region of Lombardy and people from all over the world, identifying the key issues in nanomedicine and their translation for the clinic. We identified the list. I will talk about them in my scientific talk this afternoon. And the results of that recently published in the journal Nature Nanotechnology. Dr. Senhai was the first author, and we participated in that report. And I will discuss how in our laboratory we address those problems later on today. This is a summary slide of the strategic vision in the Alliance for Nanohealth. We start at the individual, 2 investigator, 3 investigator level. We try to create opportunities for these to assemble in larger groups, in center-type entities with different focus areas, and I will describe them to some level of detail. And we try to implement translational mechanisms that include the infrastructure that individual investigators, individual companies, or individual institutions would have too much of an expense or too much of a resistance to set up. So we do that as a collegial effort. And we recognize that this is the name of the game. Unless you are able to bring it into commercial products, that will never benefit anybody in the clinic, the way things are, at least right now. So we focus on that very much as well. I would like to spend 1 minute to talk about assembly of a different type, assembly of multiple disciplines in a vision setting type of mode. I had the privilege of serving the National Cancer Institute in the United States for 2 years, between the years 2003 and 2005. Then the director was a gentleman that is now Dr. Senhai's boss. Dr. Andy von Eschenbach, right here, was director of the National Cancer Institute and is now the commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. So Doctor, in those revolutionary years, I have tremendous admiration for Dr. von Eschenbach. He essentially launched the notion that it was time, given that we have made great progress in the laboratory in understanding cancer, but the translation of that in the clinic has been dismal, has been very, very, very minute, very, very unacceptable. He said it's time to bring in new approaches, new sciences, new perspectives, to integrate, not to replace what we knew from the molecular biology perspective, but to integrate. So essentially in those days, 3 major programs were launched, and Dr. Ann Barker right here was essentially the mastermind of that, the Cardinal Richelieu of the story, if you will. And under the overall purview of this group that contains, I think, 15 Nobel laureates, you recognize some of them. This is, of course, Zarhuni, not a Nobel laureate, but of course the boss of the NIH. You see Varmus, you see Hartwell, you see other great people, Bob Weinberg, you know, also one of Dr. Sharp, James Watson. No, that's James Watson. And the notion was, let's discuss, identify ways to bring in truly innovative approaches. As a result of those discussions, 3 new programs were launched. One has to do with biomarkers, early identification, and that was led by Dr. Hartwell here, Nobel laureate director of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. Lee Hood spearheaded the application of mathematics, if you will, to biology in the field of systems biology with the new programs that are coming online. My job was to bring together nanotechnology. So we launched it in 2005. And working with them has been a tremendous experience, and I will reflect on that this afternoon. But if there is one experience that comes close to being in a hurricane for 12 hours, believe me, is explaining nanotechnology to Dr. James Watson. No, the feeling was very, very similar, and the danger, I think, was also probably just as great. So in terms, and I conclude, in terms of programmatic recommendations, we'll talk about the science this afternoon. The programmatic recommendation from our experience has been to start from the grassroots level and build up from 2 at a time to centers of centers. To be driven, we have a driver, a focus. For us is clinical translation. If you don't like clinical translation, one overall driver you need to have, whatever that is. Third, you can have different financial support systems or economic support drivers so that you can ensure what is necessary, stability of vision and funding. My personal observation, I certainly echo without having the competence what Dr. Salvatore said, but my big observation about Italy is that it's impossible to have continuity. The great people, there is funding from time to time, there are great ideas from time to time, it just doesn't keep going. I had the privilege of chairing the National Committee reporting to the Palazzo Chigi, and some of the members of the committee, like Professor Giacca, are here. We spent 2 years, made a great plan, turned it in, government change. I don't know where it is, they probably made papers, airplanes, and with that, but I don't know that I ever saw it again. And even things that start after 6 months are then let go, so that's a major concern. Highly recommended broad network collaborations, broad networks of advisors, highly recommended. To paraphrase a great statement by President Kennedy, he said, ask not what the nation can do for you, ask what you can do for the nation. I think this type of interdisciplinary collaborations can only work if rather than asking what can this center do for me, we ask what can I do to help this mission come together through the vision of this new center. And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ferrari. Thank you also for your optimistic view. And also for giving us a picture of what's going on in the USA, also for giving us a picture of the virtuous cycle between investors, researchers, and applications. Yeah. I think that's the main idea. And so let's start with the round table. I will give the word to Professor Marco Aimone Marsan. He's a professor of electronic department of the Politecnico di Turin. Is director also the Institute for Electronic Information Telecommunication Engineering of the National Research Council, CNR. So, what's going on in Italy?
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to be here, substituting for Director of Politecnico di Torino, Professor Francesco Profumo, who apologizes for not being able to be here with you this morning, but he asked me to convey his greetings to you all, and he asked me to report on some of the activities, not on the whole of Italy. I'm afraid I'm not qualified, but at least on what Politecnico is trying to do in the area of nanotechnologies. Before giving you specific detail about what are our main efforts in the area of nanotechnologies, I, however, would like to try to answer to some of the remarks that were made previously by Professor Ferrari and by Professor Salvatore, because I think they actually pointed to some of the weaknesses of the Italian system. And I would like to stress the fact that at Politecnico in Torino we are trying to do something to improve this kind of situation. In particular, since Director Profumo started office, our main goal has been to establish within the area of Politecnico an industrial research campus. So space for joint labs between industries and our academic research groups, so as to be able to give continuity to some of the joint research initiatives that otherwise more or less come and go and are not as effective as we hope will be these long-term research initiatives. Some of these are with very large multinational companies like General Motors that is just moving in with a large group of researchers to investigate in the area of the new diesel engines, which also has some fallbacks on the application of nanotechnologies. And in fact, some of the research contracts that we are already working on together with General Motors are in the areas of nanotechnologies. And another giant that is coming to our industrial research campus is Microsoft, that has established an innovation center within the premises of Politecnico di Torino. And we have some, more or less a dozen other larger and, well, not larger than GM and Microsoft, but medium and small scale enterprises that have accepted this offer and have established partnerships with labs within Politecnico di Torino. We do hope that this can be a reasonable approach to strengthen cooperation between academia and industry in Italy, and can be one step forward in the right direction to improve innovation in the Italian industrial sector, which is one of the points that Professor Salvatore was pointing at. Coming now to the aspects related to nanotechnologies, we started within Politecnico some years ago an effort to bring together different departments and having them work and cooperate in the areas related to nanotechnologies. We were fairly successful because 6 of the departments of Politecnico di Torino accepted to invest in these research areas. First of all, the physics and the material science departments, but then also the electronics department, the mechanics department, the mathematics department, and the structural engineering department joined this initiative. With essentially 4 lines of activities, one on micro and nanosystems, one on chemical applications of nanotechnologies, the third on nanostructured materials, and the last one on biomedical applications, which for us, being a technical university, we are fairly similar to Politecnico di Milano in structure, so we offer courses in engineering and architecture. Opening a research line in biomedical application has been a fairly innovative step. We are doing this through a fairly large research lab, which obtained funding both from the national funding agencies and from an internal initiative of Politecnico di Torino, who invested a significant amount of money over the last 5 years in the initiation of this research lab. The research lab has 2 main sites, one on Torino and another one in Chivasso, and we have a stand here in the exhibition. So if you are interested in details, I can maybe offer some more details later on, or you can try to contact the people who are here at the exhibition, who will be delighted to discuss the details with you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Mersan. So, if I consider, I mean, from a journalistic point of view, I mean, a lot of research has been done in the labs, the universities. So, and the impression is there's still a lot to do to improve the dialogue between the universities, labs, and industry. I'm talking about especially the enormous amount of small and medium-sized industries which are in Italy, and probably they could, I mean, have a lot of, I mean, improving their technology, in their products, in their processing. So why? What can we do about it?
Okay, if I can take this one very quickly. Yes, I promise very quickly. The point is, if there is one thing that I disagreed with Dr. Salvatore and his slides, and here I'm exposing myself to public ridicule for disagreeing with the giant, I'm not sure that it will be the big companies that will bring nanotechnologies into the marketplace. Probably so for industrial applications, but for medical applications, I think the paradigm is going to be more that of biotechnology. The small companies and those that make it grow to the point that they become acquired for 100 times they could have been bought for 5 years before by the chemical companies. That's what happened in the biotech model. I think nanotech is going to be the same. I think it is really up to us, the investigators, to put together, to start companies and to grow them to the point that they can actually get picked up.
I completely agree. Most of the new technologies are in fact being introduced by small companies. There are two types of innovations. The drastic innovations usually are introduced by small companies, but then they are purchased, they are acquired by the big companies, which make continuous small improvements. But in the long run, those small continuous improvements are as important as the dramatic innovations that come. We say Italy has tremendous, excellent small and medium-sized companies. It is true, indeed. But when the world was not as globalized as it is today, they could trainare, they could drive the Italian economy. But when the world globalized, size also becomes important. So you need both. You need the small, innovating companies, and you need the large ones. Among the 500 largest companies in the world, 168 are American, 95 are Japanese, and between 30 and 40 are French, German, and English. Italy has only 7 or 8. Small Netherlands has 11 or 12. So both are important. We need most of the small companies that make the dramatic innovations, but also we need the organization. We need the overall structure that then pushes, acquires them, and makes small improvements, which in the long run becomes as important as the dramatic innovations. This is the problem of Italy. The small, wonderful small companies, but then there is no overall organization. And we have it even in the leading sectors. Italy should be a leader in tourism. And who owns most of the chains of hotels is the foreign companies. Now people say, Tremonti, an investment, or Montezemolo, an investment is an investment. No, because the large company who owns the touristic, the hotels and so on, they decide when to close or not to close. They receive the profits. If there is a wonderful manager, they bring it in. So they take the core competency, and all the services, the high-value services, go to the foreigner. So it's important, and Italy needs this organization, not necessarily large companies, but the equivalent of I distretti industriali, the equivalent, because you have to be of a certain size. I'll start. In banking, size is important, up to the point where you become one of the 10 largest banks. Then efficiency becomes paramount. So both are necessary.
Okay, any consideration by Professor Lacaille?
It's really difficult to add more to what we have already seen. We are struggling and facing these difficulties. We are quite aware of all the problems we have. And as Politecnico di Torino is doing, we are also trying to set up, let's say, the proper bridge between companies, knowledge, which is important. So we have to push knowledge and education into our students in these and other challenging and novel fields, and trying to bring small and medium companies close to innovation and universities. We are also setting up science parks. We are trying also to open the engineering field to close applications in medical care, cancer treatment. The point here is to set up a system, to set up the proper, let's say, knowledge and the proper critical mass in terms of scientists, in terms of investments, and in terms also of sensitivity of our, let's say, political environment. We are trying to be constructive. We are trying to really do our best. So far, the signals that we have received are not so, let's say, good. We are just after some financial laws which have significantly cut the, let's say, the funding available for the education, for the university systems. We don't know how Italy can survive to be competitive with such kind of policy. We, however, are still trying to have to be positive or somehow to face these further difficulties, and we hope that at least at the local level, at least in the good environment, at least in the regions where indeed we have knowledge capitals available and somehow more sensitivity from our political partners to build up something significant to be somehow promoting innovation and technology in this country.
Okay. Dr. Sanha.
So just quickly, I'd like to give maybe my personal perspective and maybe a little bit of the FDA's perspective in terms of an efficient process for doing this. What we're seeing is that the large companies are not taking up nanotechnology. Slowly, I'm sorry, lentamente. They are not taking up nanotechnology because of the inherent risk. And you have to understand, in our current economic environment, if I were in a big company, my approach might be the same, especially if I was the head of R&D. The most efficient way, or one of the most efficient ways to do it, is exactly the way Dr. Ferrari and Dr. Salvatore explained, and that is to stimulate the innovation in the small biotech companies. And after you take that embryonic technology through a certain phase, hand it over through licensing and other strategies to the larger companies, and at the time you do so, the risks for them, both the economic risks and the business risk and the scientific risk, are a lot less. At that point in time, you also have less risk with the technology itself, because you have, up to a certain amount, eliminated things like, the hundreds of lead compounds you might be looking at. And it is at that point when the company, the large pharmaceutical company, then has, a business strategy to take forward. Over and over again, we see that that is probably one of the best strategies to move forward. So if you are a small company, your best bet would be to work diligently to stimulate the innovation and then try and find a partner to then bring it to market. And because you certainly will not have the resources to take it through clinical trials, which is very, very expensive and timely. And then you factor in the time of patents, by which you have, of course, a limited time for market exclusivity. And the longer you take is the less your potential return on your investment is going to be. So just a few cents.
Thanks so much. Dr. Ferrari, Professor Ferrari?
I just wanted to ask Dr. Senhai a question. how does the FDA interface with the regulatory body in Europe, if at all? Because, of course, how do the information that you talked about translate for our European or for our international global counterparts?
So we are working very closely with the EMEA and other regulatory bodies, such as the one in Japan, and the hope is to standardize practices and to share knowledge and best practices, because we don't, as long as you are planning on marketing a product under our jurisdiction in the United States, you have to go through the FDA. Our hope is to work with these foreign regulatory bodies to standardize approaches, to share policies, and to learn together. So in doing so, you don't have a separate set of standards in one country or in one continent versus the other. And we hope that that would be provide an efficient process for regulation of really all technologies, but including nanotechnology. Did that answer your question?
You know, there is a cost. It's been estimated $1 billion to bring one new drug on the market. So I'm in full agreement. It's over $1 billion because one has to consider all the attempts that don't succeed and all the testing and all the clearing of the drug before it's brought. So it's true, certainly what has been said, what Dr. Sinai said regarding the large firms not wanting to take, in fact, what they are doing, they are scrambling to buy the small pharmaceutical firms which have a research program in place, and they are potentially developing new drugs.
Okay, thanks a lot. Second question, regulations, no? Especially Dr. Sanai. That's part of the public opinion in the USA, but also in Europe, just outside, probably, I don't know if you have seen, there are some protesters against the NANOFORUM, nanotechnology, they call them necrotechnologies. Well, that's, I mean, they're perfectly entitled. We went there together with Dr. Sanai and Dr. Ferrara. We spoke with them. Probably if I had 18 years, probably I would be on the other side. I mean, that's another question. So why, so the potential risk of nanotechnology might pose to the environment and human health. What can you do to reassure public opinion? I would add, there are a few months ago, somebody, a Democrat representative in the Wisconsin state, proposed a registry for nano products. In the city of Berkeley, in the town of Berkeley, there is a similar registry. Yes. You live in Berkeley?
15 years.
Okay.
So that is quite a loaded question, so let me see how I can break it up. I think it's extremely important that as we move forward, that we share information in the public domain as much as possible. I think a poor job there would undermine trust and would undermine our credibility, our meaning the scientific community. As we learn more, we need to get this information out there. Now, what we saw outside this morning isn't very different from what we've seen over many years when you look at things as stem cell research and genetically modified organisms. Every single new emerging technology brings with it a sense of resistance, a sense of lack of understanding, and out of that generates fear. The best that we can do is to be as transparent as possible, sharing not just what we learn in terms of potential benefits, but also the risks, and more importantly, take the next step to show how we're mitigating these risks. It's very important for everyone to understand that there is no such thing as a completely safe drug. And it goes across the board, whether it's a nano-engineered drug or otherwise. Every patient will respond differently, and there is no such thing as a 100% safe drug. What we have to do is to make sure that we do the work and the background that we need to target it to the patient, and Dr. Ferrari can comment on the personalized medicine approach, and to find ways to mitigate the risks to all patients so that we lessen it as much as possible. But there is no such thing, whether it's nano-engineered or otherwise, a completely safe medical product.
If I can, I'd like to take the notion of team sport to yet another level, maybe even harder And I spend a lot of time on the ethics side of the discourse. And I've been, I briefed the council, the White House Council on Nanotechnology, the first ever meeting at the head on this. By the way, that the council is led by a great Italian-American, Ed Pellegrino, perhaps you know him, he used to chair, the director of the Kennedy Institute. I've been sent representing the US government to Kyoto, to the meetings in Kyoto twice, so I spend a lot of time. And I think about it a lot of time, all the time. To me, the only answer that I can feel my conscience at ease with on the notion of ethical approaches to nanotechnology is we need to involve the entire community as broadly as possible in all decision-making processes, with transparency, as Dr. Senai says, with educational programs, making sure that we are open, that we discuss. And let me bring up, this is fundamental, otherwise there is no way to ease the tensions. You continue to have enemies in the house, and that doesn't work. Let me talk about the young men and women out there. I spent a tremendous time talking about them with them this morning. They have this almost healing property and certainty that they are right. It's beautiful to watch, even though many times you don't agree with what they say. I would encourage you to go talk to them if you can today, for a fundamental reason, not to convince them. I'm not going to convince them. No. And it's not a matter at the end of the day of as much as who's right and who's wrong, because there is a way things get mediated through magical dynamics of societal evolutions inside. It's a question of making sure that everybody feels enfranchised and participatory in the discussion, that they have a seat at the table. I told them, come on in. I told them, come on stage, spend some time in my lab. I told them, come to the meeting, come hear the talks, ask questions. And they say, no, 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 because, and I'm not making this up, because you're going to make us feel uncomfortable, you're going to make fun of us, you're going to treat us unfairly. You know, only one way to address that is with a little bit of patience, and, openness, and I think that is necessary, otherwise there is this tremendous internal resistance that in Europe, more than the United States, I will say, has generated the decisions that I cannot comment about that have been catastrophic.
All science is dangerous, and we have to be careful, as indicated. We have to have participatory decisions. But when we come, I mean, we all face this on the environment. A staunch environmentalist, un puro ambientalista, if you ask him what is the optimal level of pollution, he or she will answer immediately, 0. But to the extent the production of goods and services inevitably leads to some pollution, the intelligent question to ask is how we can minimize the level of pollution to produce the goods and services we want. How do we minimize the risk of nanotechnology? So we have to study. And if one medicine, if one production of a good produces so much pollution that we believe it's unacceptable, then we have to have the courage to say no. But to say no to everything and anything, it's defeatist. All science involves risks. We have to study the costs and benefits of these and make a decision. Otherwise, and it goes with science, it goes with the environment, it goes to everything. We were in Milano with the Nobel Prize winner Mondel during the time of contests or opposition. And the mayor of Milano, Formigoni, said maybe we should not have this discussion of globalization. And Mondel said, no, we should have it. And when someone complained of pollution and so on, Mondel asked him, how did you get here? Did you walk here? You came by car or train, which pollutes. You go home, you turn on the lights, it pollutes. So we have these costs and benefits, and we have to do the best we can. There are costs and benefits, and economists can help in evaluating those costs and benefits. Science does the benefits. Then comes the economist to see what are the costs involved and the benefits and make a decision. But this is all the time. Science cannot move forward without some risks, but it has to be done intelligently.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Tomellini, that many of you know, has put together the European program for nanotechnology. And in that, I don't know who has done more for nanotechnology in the world, literally. So I think it would be great if you could, with Mr. Chairman's permission, add your perspective on this.
Thank you. Thank you for this. Yes, I created the European Initiative on Nanotechnology, and then this was some 10 years ago. And exactly what Professor Ferrari was mentioning, the idea of putting together all the stakeholders, because we need a consensual innovation and a realistic innovation, and an innovation that does not create negative externalities. You were mentioning, okay, some pollution is maybe inevitable, but which pollution? What we are talking about? Who pays for this? Here in this place, I think it was the coke plants of Edison. I think here there is so much arsenite, was so much arsenite in the place we are. So who pays for this? Industrial development cannot produce negative externalities. We cannot have a situation where we produce wealth. Okay, research, you spend money to create knowledge. Innovation, you use the knowledge with venture capital, equities to produce wealth. You generate jobs, you create, you make your country richer. But then we cannot allow ourselves to create also some damages that somebody else pays. And this not. So not only minimize pollution, okay, when it's inevitable, but understand who pays for this and target a real sustainable development. In 2050, how will be the situation in the world? Europe will have Europe had 25% of the world population in the beginning of the 19th century. We will be probably 5–6%. Europe will have water scarcity. What we do with water? We defend water with the armies. Oil will always be there, but will be very scarce. We cannot use oil to drive cars, so we will use oil for making chemistry. I mean, these kind of perspectives, we have to involve all the stakeholders because we need a consensual approach, a responsible approach to drive our development in this direction. Because otherwise, if somebody wins too much in the societal and economic game, somebody lose too much, and then we will have some problems.
Okay, thanks so much. Professor Marson, we got 15 minutes, 15 more minutes. Professor Marson was making an interesting consideration about education. Very quickly.
Yes, very quickly. We did not touch probably in this panel the issue about education. We also need to put in place programs and curricula in order to prepare for these new technologies and for these new jobs talented students in our universities. We are doing our part at Politecnico in this direction, in the sense that we have started a program on the application of nanotechnologies to the ICT sector, and this is jointly managed between Torino, Grenoble and Lausanne, and students study and have an international experience, study and visit different labs, spend time in different places, and we believe that this is a significant step also to provide the Italian enterprises with skilled young people who can effectively bring innovation into their products.
Okay. Thanks so much, Professor Marson. So last question, it's about, I would ask to any of you a prediction about the future? No? No, not necessarily. No. You just failed the last weekend, didn't you?
I have at the American Economic Association in San Francisco on January 4th, 5 Nobel Prize winners in economics, and the title of the session is Nobels and the Future of the World Economy. But it's not the end of the world, as many people are saying. We have a major economic and financial problem which started and created by the United States. The fault rests with the United States and to some extent England. But those people who live, the pessimists, who live on disasters and the end of the world, they have been always wrong. I think the financial crisis, we have reached the bottom. It is a flat bottom. We will probably stay until the middle of next year, and when growth resumes, it will resume slowly. But all the people, the Cassandras of the world, they have always been wrong. You know, they are very dangerous people. They never smile, and they are always wrong. And, you know, what they do is they predict the end of the world, and when it does not come, instead of being happy, that they are very unhappy. And so this is, for example, Paul Krugman wrote in the New York Times in 2002 that the United States would go back into recession. The US was in recession in 2001, and in 2002 he predicted that the US would go back into recession, in slang, double dip. You see, he didn't say maybe. He has a direct link with God, and so he was sure. And it didn't happen. Then in 2003, he repeated that there would be a recession, which it didn't come. In all frankness, he's a brilliant economist, and he ought to know. Usually, during recessions or slow growth, labor productivity declines. Instead, in 2001 and 2002, labor productivity in the United States continued to increase, which meant, to me, and I responded not afterwards, at the time, to me it meant that the underlying economy, the real economy, was not in trouble. These were exaggerations, and therefore you needed a correction, and that was the recession. So even now, it is the US will not go into recession. It's slow growth, maybe only in Europe, Germany, Spain, and England will be in a shallow recession. But the word recession is such a terrible word. But negative growth of minus 0.1% or positive growth of plus 0.1% are not very different. But one is a recession and one is not. Therefore, to answer your question, I think we have reached the bottom, and in fact, I'm going to tomorrow. I'm leaving this afternoon to go to La Fiera del Levante di Bari to discuss these problems. Then the day after, on Friday, I'll be in Venice to discuss the crisis in education in Europe versus the United States. Then on Monday, I'll come back to Milano al Politecnico. And then Thursday, I'm at Caserta with Marcegaglie, Cipolletta and company to discuss.
Okay. Lot of fun.
So the problem is we have reached truly the bottom.
Okay.
And the bottom is seen in the United States exactly with what happened this weekend.
Okay, we got your message. Final question. Supposing you have a $1 million, you have to invest in nanotechnologies. Which field you consider the most promising? I would say medicine, nanodrugs, industry, automotive, electronics, energy, building and construction, and also military.
For the
a lot of investors.
Yeah, no, very quick. For the thing, I think medicine comes first, and then electronics, and then even energy, in that order. But medicine surely comes first, and there's dramatic results.
Okay, Ferrari.
I will conclude with a commercial.
You can't say medicine.
The
no,
four
please.
letters are ARWR. That's the ticker of the company Arrowhead Research Corporation. I am the Director of Scientific Strategy. In the interest of full disclosure, publicly listed company on Wall Street. Not a single sector, an umbrella company that includes multiple sectors, is the hedging the risks type of strategy. And if I can answer the question about the predictions for the future, I will leave scientific predictions for the afternoon, but I concur that we have reached the bottom, things are going to get better, despite an awful start. I think Milan vincerà il campionato e anche la Coppa UEFA.
Okay. Professor Lacaita, where would you like to invest?
Well, basically on the same, let's say, on the same fields, I would say. Medicine by sure, and we are already. We are not switching the job. We are now trying to build up this new alliance for medicine here in Milano, and the idea is to bring engineering and also the medical side all together for innovation.
Professor Marsden?
Well, medicine is probably an easy prediction with probably ICT in second place. Thank you.
And thank you so much. Wendy, you are the last one. You can't say drugs.
No, I can't be too biased against drugs. It has to be all nanomedicine. All nanomedicine.
Okay.
So, the final question to Mr. Piazza.
Yes, the
Final
question
conclusions.
is, you have just few minutes for a panino, and then, sorry, no more time, sorry. And then we have many other sessions in the afternoon. So, I think it was the excellent starting for NanoForum. Thank you very much to everybody all, and good work. Thank you.